Every year, on the night of October 31st, something strange happens in America. Millions of people transform their homes into monuments to death. They hang plastic skeletons in their windows. They carve faces into vegetables and light them from within. They dress their children as ghosts and witches and send them into the darkness to knock on strangers' doors and demand food. If you described Halloween to someone who had never heard of it, if you explained it objectively, without the cultural context, it would sound insane. It would sound like a mass ritual, a nationwide observance of something dark and ancient, something we've forgotten how to name. And in a way, it is. Halloween is the second largest commercial holiday in America. We spend billions of dollars on costumes, decorations, and candy. We think of it as harmless fun, as an American tradition, as a night for children to eat too much sugar and adults to wear ridiculous costumes. But every single Halloween tradition, every costume, every carved pumpkin, every piece of candy given to a stranger's child has roots in something much darker, something brutal, something that was never meant to be fun. Tonight, we're going to unwrap Halloween like a piece of candy, peeling back the bright commercial wrapper to reveal what's underneath. And what we'll find is this: human sacrifice, starvation, witch hunts, deals with the devil, and the omnipresent specter of death. We'll answer the questions you've probably never thought to ask. Why do we celebrate Halloween on October 31st specifically? Why that date? What's special about it? Why do we dress in costumes and pretend to be something we're not? Why do we carve faces into pumpkins and light them from within? Why do we send children door to door to demand treats from strangers? Why are black cats considered unlucky, especially on Halloween? Why do we decorate with skeletons and images of death? None of it is arbitrary. Every tradition has a reason. Every symbol has a history. And almost all of those histories involve death, real death, not Halloween movie death. The death of starvation, of disease, of persecution, of winter cold and human cruelty. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If you believe that the traditions we take for granted deserve to be understood, that the line between celebration and survival ritual is worth exploring, you can help us continue this work by liking this video and subscribing. Your support allows us to keep digging into the histories we've forgotten. Tonight, we will walk through 7 Halloween traditions. We'll go back to their origins, sometimes 2,000 years back, to Celtic Ireland and the bonfires on the hills. We'll trace how they evolved through Roman conquest, Christian conversion, medieval witch hunts, Irish famine, and American commercialization. By the end, you'll never look at Halloween the same way. You'll see the blood beneath the candy. You'll understand that when you carve a jack-o'-lantern, you're recreating an Irishman's eternal damnation. When children say trick or treat, they're echoing a threat that was once very real and very dangerous. Halloween is not what we think it is. It never was. Welcome to the Midnight Archives. Tiat. To understand Halloween, we must travel back approximately 2,000 years to a time before Halloween existed, before Christianity reached Western Europe, before the Roman Empire had fully conquered the Celtic lands. The Celts were not a single unified people. They were a collection of tribes and cultures that dominated much of Western Europe. Ireland, Scotland, Wales, parts of England, Brittany and France, and regions of what are now Spain, Germany, and beyond. They spoke related languages. They shared similar religious beliefs, and they understood the world in ways we can barely comprehend today. For the Celts, time was not linear. It was cyclical. The year was not a march from January to December. It was a wheel, endlessly turning, divided into light and dark, life and death, growth and decay. They recognized two primary seasons, the light half of the year and the dark half of the year. The light half was summer, the time of growth, warmth, and life. The dark half was winter, the time of cold, darkness, and death. And the boundary between these two halves was not a gradual transition. It was a threshold, a doorway, a single night when the old year died and the new year began. That night was October 31st, or more accurately, the night between October 31st and November 1st, because the Celts counted their days from sunset to sunset. When the sun set on October 31st, the new year began. They called this night Samhain, pronounced so-giru-in or sa-vin, depending on the region. The word means summer's end. October 31st is not arbitrary. It's not a date someone picked out of a hat. It's tied to the rhythms of agriculture and astronomy that governed ancient life. By late October, the harvest was complete. All the crops that could be gathered had been gathered. All the grain was stored. All the fruits and vegetables were preserved. The fields were bare, waiting for winter. The livestock had been evaluated. The animals that would be kept through winter, the breeding stock, the dairy cows, the essential horses, those were kept and sheltered. But the animals that couldn't be supported through the lean months, that would eat more food than they were worth, those were slaughtered. Late October was slaughter season. Blood flowed, meat was salted, smoked, preserved. Nothing was wasted. Bones were boiled for marrow. Hides were cured. The animals died so the humans could survive winter. And winter was coming. The days were growing shorter, the nights longer. The sun was losing its power. The warmth was draining from the world. And everyone knew what winter meant. Winter meant death. Not metaphorical death, actual death. Every winter, people in the village would die. The very old, the very young, the sick, the weak. They might not survive until spring. Food would run low. Disease would spread in the crowded, poorly ventilated homes where families huddled for warmth. The cold itself could kill. October 31st marked the transition into the season of death. The Celts knew this was coming. They couldn't prevent it, but they could prepare. And they could try to protect themselves, both practically and spiritually. Because the Celts believed that on this night, when the boundary between summer and winter dissolved, another boundary dissolved as well. The boundary between the living and the dead. The Celts believed in the other world, sometimes called the Seed, or the realm of the Aus Sea. This was not heaven or hell, as Christians would later conceive of them. It was a parallel realm, existing alongside the mortal world, but separated from it by an invisible barrier. The other world was populated by spirits, by fairies, not cute Disney fairies, but dangerous supernatural beings, by gods and ancestors and entities that had never been human. It was beautiful and terrible. It was a place of magic and danger. Normally, the barrier between the mortal world and the other world was strong. The two realms rarely touched. But on Samhain, the barrier grew thin, permeable. On this night, beings from the other world could cross over into the mortal realm. And the dead, the human dead, those who had died in the past year, could return. This was not necessarily a good thing. Yes, beloved ancestors might return to visit their families. That was welcome. But malevolent spirits could also cross over. Hostile fairies, dark entities that wished harm on the living. The boundary worked both ways. It kept the mortals safe from the other world, but it also kept the other world safe from mortals. On Samhain, with the boundary dissolved, anything could happen. The Celts needed to protect themselves, and they needed to honor the dead properly so that their ancestors would protect them from the malevolent spirits. Samhain was about survival, physical survival of winter, and spiritual survival of this dangerous night. As the sun set on October 31st, the villagers would begin their preparations. The druids, the Celtic priests, the keepers of knowledge, the mediators between the human and spirit worlds, would lead the ceremonies. They were powerful, feared, respected. They knew the proper rituals. They knew how to speak to the gods and the dead. On hilltops throughout the Celtic lands, massive bonfires would be lit, not small campfires, enormous blazes visible for miles, their smoke rising into the night sky like pillars connecting earth to heaven. These fires served multiple purposes. First, they were sacred fires, blessed by the druids. Fire was purifying, protective. It represented the sun's power, fighting back against the encroaching darkness of winter. Second, they were communal gathering points. The entire community would come together at the bonfire, bringing offerings, participating in rituals, strengthening the bonds between the living. Third, they were sacrificial altars. Animals were sacrificed at Samhain. Cattle, sheep, horses. The choicest animals from the harvest slaughter were offered to the gods, their blood spilled, their meat burned in the sacred fire. The smoke carried the offering to the gods. The community shared in the feast, eating the meat that wasn't burned, celebrating the harvest, storing strength for winter. And in some cases, though the evidence is debated and controversial, there may have been human sacrifice as well. Classical Roman writers, such as Julius Caesar and Strabo, claimed that the Celts practiced human sacrifice, particularly of criminals and prisoners of war. They described massive wicker structures, giant human-shaped cages, filled with living people and animals, and set on fire as offerings to the gods. Modern scholars debate how accurate these Roman accounts were. The Romans had their own reasons to portray the Celts as barbaric. It justified conquering them. The archaeological evidence for widespread human sacrifice is limited. But there is some evidence. Bodies found in peat bogs in Ireland and Britain dating to the Celtic period show signs of ritual killing. The Lindo man, discovered in 1984, had been struck on the head, strangled, and had his throat cut before being placed in a bog. This triple death matches descriptions of Celtic sacrifice in ancient texts. Whether human sacrifice occurred regularly or only in extreme circumstances, the fact remains: Samhain was soaked in blood. Animal blood, certainly, and possibly human blood as well. The barrier between worlds was thin, and blood was the currency that bought safety. After the sacrifices, families would take flame from the communal bonfire back to their homes. Every hearth fire in the village had been extinguished before Samhain. The old fires were dead. Now, new fires were lit from the sacred bonfire, carrying its protective power into every home. These hearth fires would burn throughout winter, kept alive day and night, never allowed to go out. They represented life, warmth, safety. As long as the fire burned, the home was protected. But fire alone was not enough. The dead had to be honored, appeased, welcomed. On Samhain night, families would set extra places at their tables. Chairs for the dead, plates of food, cups of ale or mead. The best food, the best portions. These were offerings to the ancestors, invitations for them to join the feast. If you honored your dead, if you remembered them and welcomed them, they would protect you. They would speak to the malevolent spirits on your behalf. They would guard your home and your family through the dangerous night and the deadly winter. But if you forgot them, if you failed to honor them properly, they might join the malevolent spirits in tormenting you. The dead could be dangerous if they felt slighted. They could bring bad luck, illness, death. It was essential to stay on their good side. Food was also left outside the home, on windowsills, on doorsteps, at crossroads. This wasn't for the ancestors. This was for the other spirits, the wandering dead, the fairies, the dark things that walked when the boundary was thin. The logic was simple and transactional. If you feed the spirits, they'll leave you alone. If you give them what they want, they won't hurt you. These offerings were protection money, paid to avoid supernatural violence. This, by the way, is the origin of giving treats on Halloween. It started as tribute paid to spirits to prevent them from cursing you. Remember that the next time you drop a fun-sized Snickers into a child's bag. And then there was the question of what to do if you encountered a malevolent spirit. What if, despite all your precautions, you came face to face with something hostile from the other world? The Celts developed a strategy: disguise. On Samhain night, people would dress in costumes. They wore animal skins and heads, the pelts of cattle, sheep, goats, horses. They blackened their faces with ash from the bonfire. They made themselves look like creatures, like spirits, like something other than human. The purpose was camouflage. If a malevolent spirit saw you on the road, it might harm you, possess you, drag you back to the other world. But if you looked like a spirit yourself, it might think you were one of them. It might leave you alone, or even fear you. Some people would make themselves look as terrifying as possible, hoping to scare away lesser spirits. Others would try to blend in, to become invisible in the darkness and chaos of Samhain night. This is the origin of Halloween costumes. They were not fun dress-up. They were spiritual camouflage, a survival strategy against supernatural threats. When children dress as ghosts and monsters on Halloween, they're continuing a 2,000-year-old tradition of disguising themselves from the dead. Samhain was also a time for divination, for trying to see the future, particularly the future of the coming winter. Who would die before spring? Who would marry? Who would prosper? The Celts believed that on Samhain, when the barriers between worlds were thin, it was easier to glimpse what was coming. The future was visible if you knew how to look. Young women would perform rituals to see who they would marry. They would peel an apple in one long strip and throw the peel over their shoulder. The shape it made on the ground would reveal their future husband's initial. They would sit in front of mirrors, brushing their hair, believing their future husband's face would appear behind them. Nuts would be placed in the fire. If they burned quietly, it was a good omen. If they popped and jumped, it was bad. Couples would put 2 nuts in the fire, one for each of them. If the nuts burned together, the relationship would last. If they jumped apart, the relationship would fail. These sound like games now, but they were deadly serious. Winter was coming. Death was coming. Any knowledge about the future, any warning, any hint about what to expect could save your life. We need to understand something fundamental about Samhain. This was not a party. This was not a celebration. This was a survival ritual performed by terrified people. The Celts were not primitive or stupid. They were sophisticated, intelligent, capable of complex thought and art and engineering. But they lived in a world they could not control, where death was ever present, where the mechanisms of nature were mysterious and terrifying. They didn't understand why crops failed, why diseases spread, why some children lived and others died. They didn't have science to explain the world. They had religion, ritual, and desperate hope. When they lit the bonfires, they were trying to hold back the darkness, literally and metaphorically. When they made sacrifices, they were trying to bargain with forces they couldn't comprehend. When they put on costumes and left out food, they were trying to protect themselves from a spiritual world that felt as real as the physical one. Winter was coming. Winter killed people. They knew this with absolute certainty, and Samhain was the moment when the door to winter opened, when the season of death began. So, they lit their fires. They honored their dead. They disguised themselves. They prayed to their gods, and they hoped it would be enough. Most of them would survive to see spring, but not all, never all. The spirits walked on Samhain night, and whether those spirits were metaphors for winter's dangers or actual supernatural entities, the fear was real. The rituals were real. The blood was real. And when the sun rose on November 1st, the new year had begun. The light half was over. The dark half had arrived. Winter was here, and all they could do was endure. For centuries, Samhain continued. The Celts performed their rituals, lit their fires, honored their dead, and survived. Generation after generation, the knowledge was passed down. The traditions were maintained. The boundary between worlds grew thin every year on October 31st, and every year the people protected themselves the best they could. But empires rise and fall. Cultures clash and merge. The Celtic world could not remain isolated forever. First came the Romans, with their legions and their own gods and their own festivals of the dead. They conquered Celtic lands, imposed their laws, but they couldn't entirely erase Celtic beliefs. Instead, something interesting happened. The festivals merged, blended, influenced each other. And then came something even more powerful than Rome, something that would transform Samhain completely, that would give it a new name and a new meaning, while never quite erasing the old darkness underneath. Christianity was coming to the Celtic lands, and the church had a decision to make: destroy Samhain or absorb it. They chose absorption, and in doing so, they created something new, something that would eventually become Halloween. But the darkness never really went away. It just learned to wear a Christian mask. Before we get to Christianity, we need to briefly discuss Rome. When the Roman Empire expanded into Celtic territories, beginning with Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul in the 50s BC, and continuing through the conquest of Britain in 43 AD, they encountered Samhain, and they recognized something familiar. The Romans had their own festival of the dead, called Feralia. It was celebrated in late February, a time when Romans honored deceased family members, brought offerings to tombs, and believed the spirits of the dead were close. The timing was different from Samhain, but the concept was similar. The Romans also celebrated Pomona, a festival honoring the goddess of fruits and trees, particularly apples. This festival occurred in early November, right around Samhain's timing. As Roman and Celtic cultures mixed in the occupied territories, these festivals began to blend. Roman colonists participated in Samhain celebrations. Celtic people adopted Roman customs. The boundaries between traditions became blurred. This is important because it shows that Samhain was not a static, isolated tradition. It was always evolving, always absorbing new influences. By the time Christianity arrived, Samhain had already been influenced by Roman religion. It was a hybrid festival, Celtic at its core, but with Roman elements layered on top. And Christianity would add yet another layer. Christianity arrived in the Celtic lands gradually, beginning in the 4th and 5th centuries AD. It came through missionaries, through converted rulers, through military conquest, and through slow cultural pressure. The missionaries faced a problem. The Celtic people had deep-rooted religious traditions. Samhain wasn't just a holiday. It was woven into the fabric of how people understood time, death, and their relationship with the spiritual world. You couldn't simply tell people to stop celebrating it. The church had learned this lesson elsewhere. Early Christianity had tried to completely replace pagan traditions with Christian ones, but it rarely worked. People clung to their old ways. Resistance was fierce. In some cases, attempting to eliminate pagan festivals led to violence and martyrdom. So, the church developed a different strategy, one that proved far more effective. Don't destroy pagan holidays. Absorb them. Give them Christian meanings. Let people continue their traditional celebrations, but reframe them as Christian observances. This wasn't cynical manipulation, or not entirely. The church genuinely believed that pagan traditions contained distorted memories of spiritual truths. By baptizing these traditions, they were restoring them to their proper Christian context. At least, that's how church leaders justified it. Samhain was a perfect candidate for this strategy. In the 7th century, the Catholic Church had a feast day called All Saints' Day, dedicated to honoring all Christian saints, including those who didn't have their own specific feast days. Originally, this was celebrated in May, on May 13th. But in 731 AD, Pope Gregory III consecrated a chapel in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome to all the saints and moved the feast day to November 1st. Why November 1st? The timing is almost certainly not a coincidence. November 1st was right after Samhain. By placing a major Christian feast on this date, the church was providing a Christian alternative to the pagan festival. Then, in 835 AD, Pope Gregory IV made All Saints' Day an official holy day of obligation throughout the entire church. Every Christian was required to observe it. It was now a major feast, impossible to ignore. The night before All Saints' Day, October 31st, became known as All Hallows' Eve. Hallow is an Old English word meaning saint or holy person. So October 31st was the evening before the day honoring all the holy ones. Eventually, All Hallows' Eve was shortened to Halloween and then to Halloween. The church had successfully attached a Christian meaning to October 31st. But they hadn't eliminated Samhain. They had simply given it a new name. But the church went further. In 998 AD, Abbot Odilo of Cluny, a powerful Benedictine monastery in France, established another feast day, All Souls' Day, celebrated on November 2nd. All Saints' Day honored the saints, the holy men and women who were definitely in heaven. But what about everyone else? What about the ordinary Christians who had died but weren't yet in heaven? What about the souls in purgatory? Catholic theology taught that most people who died went to purgatory, an intermediate state where souls were purified of their sins before being allowed into heaven. These souls needed help. They needed prayers from the living to speed their progress through purgatory. All Souls' Day was dedicated to praying for the dead in purgatory. It was a day when the living could help their deceased loved ones move closer to heaven. Now, there were 3 days in a row dedicated to death. October 31st, All Hallows' Eve, the vigil, the preparation. November 1st, All Saints' Day, honoring those definitely in heaven. November 2nd, All Souls' Day, praying for those in purgatory. This 3-day period became known as All Hallowtide. It was the Christian season of death, perfectly timed to absorb the Celtic Samhain. But here's what the church couldn't control. People kept believing in the old ways. Yes, they went to church on All Saints' Day. Yes, they prayed for the souls in purgatory on All Souls' Day. But they also kept lighting bonfires on hilltops. They kept leaving food out for the spirits. They kept dressing in costumes. They kept performing divination rituals. The Christian overlay was real, but the pagan core remained. People adapted their explanations. Now they said they were protecting themselves from demons rather than fairies. Now they said they were honoring Christian saints rather than Celtic gods. But the actions remained largely the same. The church pragmatically allowed this. As long as people attended church and professed Christian faith, the church didn't police every tradition too strictly. It was more important to have people nominally Christian with some pagan practices than to have them reject Christianity entirely. So Samhain and All Hallows' Eve coexisted, merged, became a hybrid festival that was neither fully pagan nor fully Christian. It was both at once, or perhaps something new that contained elements of both. During the medieval period, a new tradition developed that would eventually evolve into trick-or-treating, souling. On All Souls' Day, poor people, often children, but sometimes adults, would go door to door in their villages, offering to pray for the deceased relatives of the households they visited. In exchange, they would receive soul cakes, small round cakes flavored with spices like nutmeg, cinnamon, and ginger. The theology behind this was transactional. The more prayers said for a soul in purgatory, the faster that soul would reach heaven. Wealthy families wanted many prayers said for their dead loved ones. But praying was time-consuming, and the wealthy had other things to do. So they would pay poor people to do the praying for them. It was an exchange. The poor got food, the wealthy got prayers. The dead, theoretically, got out of purgatory faster. Everyone benefited. The soulers would sing, "A soul cake, a soul cake. Please, good missus, a soul cake. 1 for Peter, 2 for Paul, 3 for him who made us all." This was not subtle. It was begging, but begging framed as religious charity. And because it was connected to praying for the dead, a sacred duty, refusing was morally difficult. If you didn't give soul cakes, you were potentially condemning your own deceased relatives to longer suffering in purgatory. Souling was especially popular in England and Ireland, and it continued for centuries. It would eventually merge with another tradition to create modern trick-or-treating. In Scotland and Ireland, a related tradition developed called guising, from disguising. Young people would dress up in costumes, often something spooky or humorous, and go door to door. But instead of just asking for food, they would perform. They would sing songs, tell jokes, recite poetry, perform short plays. This was entertainment in exchange for treats. The costumes served multiple purposes. First, they maintained the old Samhain tradition of disguising yourself from spirits. Second, they added theatrical flair to the performance. Third, they allowed young people to temporarily step outside their normal social roles. A poor child dressed as a king, a servant dressed as a nobleman, a girl dressed as a boy. For one night, the social hierarchy was playfully inverted. Guising was popular from at least the 16th century and probably earlier. Like souling, it was a form of sanctioned begging, but one that required the beggar to earn their treat through performance. Both souling and guising would be carried to America by immigrants in the 19th century, where they would merge and evolve into trick-or-treating. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. By the late medieval period, the church had achieved a partial victory. October 31st and the days following were now thoroughly Christian in their official meaning. The language was Christian, the calendar was Christian, the official justification was Christian, but the practices remained largely pagan. The bonfires, the costumes, the divination, the offerings to spirits, these continued, just with a thin Christian veneer painted over them. The church had not destroyed Samhain. It had absorbed it, baptized it, renamed it. But the darkness underneath remained. The fear of death remained. The sense that October the 31st was a dangerous night remained. Christianity had given people a new framework for understanding that danger. Demons and devils instead of fairies and ancestral spirits. But the core experience was the same. The boundary between worlds was thin. The dead were close. Protection was needed. All Hallows Eve was Samhain with a Christian name. Nothing more, nothing less. But if people thought the Christian era would make Halloween less dark, less frightening, they were wrong. Because the medieval and early modern periods would add new horrors to Halloween, new reasons to fear, new sources of terror. The church taught that devils and demons were real, that they actively sought to tempt and destroy human souls, that they had servants on earth, human servants who had made pacts with Satan, who practiced dark magic, who gathered in secret to worship evil. These human servants of the devil were called witches. And starting in the 15th century, Europe would descend into an hysteria of witch hunts that would kill tens of thousands of people, mostly women. These hunts would become inextricably linked with Halloween, adding a new layer of fear to the holiday. The witches, the church said, gathered on Halloween night. It was their high holy day, their most powerful Sabbath. It was when they met with the devil himself, when they cast their most terrible curses, when they did their greatest harm. And so Halloween, which had begun as a Celtic festival of death and spirits, which had been absorbed into Christian tradition, now became associated with witchcraft, with devil worship, with women being tortured and burned alive. The darkness was growing deeper, and at the heart of that darkness was a symbol that would become inseparable from Halloween: the black cat. Christianity had transformed Samhain into All Hallows Eve. But it couldn't eliminate the fear. If anything, it added to it. The church taught that devils were real, that evil was active in the world, that Halloween was a night of supernatural danger. And then the church began to identify the devil's servants, women mostly, poor women, old women, women who lived alone, who knew too much about herbs, who owned cats. The witch hunts were coming, and they would change Halloween forever, turning it into a night associated not just with death, but with persecution, torture, and the systematic murder of innocent people. But before we get to the witches and the cats, we need to talk about another Halloween tradition, one that seems wholesome and fun on the surface, but which has roots in one of the darkest deals ever made. We need to talk about Jack and his lantern and the devil who refused to take his soul. In the misty hills of rural Ireland, probably sometime in the 18th century, people began telling a story about a man named Jack. The details varied depending on who was telling it. In some versions, Jack was a blacksmith. In others, a farmer. Sometimes he was simply described as a man of ill repute. But certain elements remained constant. Jack was clever, Jack was greedy, and Jack was a drunk. Jack lived for himself. He cheated his neighbors, stole when he could get away with it, lied as easily as breathing, and spent most of his time in the pub, drinking away whatever money he'd acquired through trickery or dishonest work. He was, in short, a thoroughly unpleasant person. The kind of person who, when they died, no one would mourn. The kind of person who deserved damnation, and the devil knew it. One night, and in these stories, it's always night, always dark, always in a place where respectable people wouldn't be. Jack was stumbling home from a pub, drunk as usual, and there, standing in his path, waiting for him, was the devil himself. The devil appeared in different forms depending on the telling. Sometimes he looked like a well-dressed gentleman in black. Sometimes he appeared as a dark figure with horns and a tail. Sometimes he wore no specific form, just a presence, a shadow, a voice in the darkness. But Jack recognized him immediately. When you're as wicked as Jack, you know the devil when you see him. "Jack," the devil said, "your time is up. I've come to collect your soul." Jack's soul belonged to hell. There was no question about that. He'd lived a life of sin, never repented, never showed remorse, never did a single good deed without an ulterior motive. His soul was the devil's property, and now the devil had come to claim it. But Jack was clever. It was his one real talent, not goodness, not hard work, not honesty, but cleverness. His mind was quick, and he could talk his way out of almost anything. "Well," Jack said, trying not to show his fear, "I suppose you've got me fair and square. But before you take me, would you grant me one last request?" The devil, amused by this mortal's audacity, asked what he wanted. "Let me have one last drink, just one more pint before I go. You can understand that, can't you? A condemned man's last request." The devil considered. What harm could one drink do? The night was young, hell was eternal, and this human soul wasn't going anywhere. He agreed. They went back to the pub together. Jack ordered his pint. The devil waited patiently. Jack drank slowly, savoring every drop, watching the devil out of the corner of his eye, his clever mind working. When Jack finished his drink, the bartender approached their table. "That'll be tuppence," he said. Jack turned to the devil and said, "You agreed to buy me a last drink. I don't have any money. You'll have to pay." The devil, who hadn't actually agreed to pay, but found this presumption amusing, reached for his purse. But Jack interrupted him. "Wait. You're the devil. You have magic powers, don't you? Surely you don't need to carry money like a common mortal. Why don't you transform yourself into a coin? Then I can use you to pay for the drink, and after the bartender puts you in his cash box, you can transform back and escape. Won't that be more impressive than just using regular money?" The devil, proud and vain and willing to show off his powers, agreed. In a shimmer of dark light, he transformed himself into a silver coin, a sixpence, bright and shining. Jack immediately snatched the coin off the table and shoved it into his pocket. Now, Jack's pocket was not empty. He kept something in that pocket at all times, a silver crucifix, a gift from his long-suffering mother, the one thing of value he owned. He wasn't a religious man, but he'd kept the crucifix for sentimental reasons, or perhaps because some deep instinct told him it might be useful someday. The crucifix's power was immediate. The devil, trapped in coin form, pressed against the holy symbol, began to burn. He tried to transform back to his true form, but the crucifix held him. He was trapped. The devil raged. His voice emanated from the coin, threatening, cursing, demanding release. But Jack kept the pocket closed. He paid the bartender with a different coin, finished his drink, and walked home with the devil literally in his pocket. When Jack got home, he took the coin out and placed it on his table, making sure the crucifix was touching it, keeping the devil trapped. Then he sat down and made his proposal. "Here's the deal," Jack said. "I'll release you. But in exchange, you have to promise not to take my soul for 10 years. Give me 10 more years of life and then you can have me." The devil, furious but helpless, had no choice. He agreed. Jack removed the crucifix, and the devil transformed back into his true form. He glared at Jack with hatred that would have turned a righteous man's blood to ice. 10 years, the devil said, "and then you're mine. You won't trick me twice." And he vanished in a smell of sulfur and rage. Jack had won. He'd bought himself 10 more years. But he'd also made an enemy of the most dangerous entity in creation. 10 years passed. Jack didn't change. He didn't become a better person. If anything, he got worse because now he thought he was clever enough to outwit even the devil. His arrogance grew. His sins multiplied. He drank more, cheated more, hurt more people. And then, exactly 10 years later to the day, the devil returned. This time there was no patience, no amusement. The devil appeared in Jack's path one night. Accounts differ on exactly where, but it was always somewhere isolated, somewhere Jack couldn't call for help, and said simply, "Time's up." Jack's heart sank. He'd known this moment was coming, but he'd somehow thought he'd escape it again. He'd had 10 years to repent, to change, to maybe, just maybe, become a good enough person that heaven might take him. But he'd wasted those 10 years, and now the devil had come to collect. But Jack was still clever, and desperate cleverness is a dangerous thing. Jack looked around and saw, growing beside the road, an apple tree. The apples were ripe, red and beautiful in the moonlight. "All right," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. "You can have me. But before we go, I'd like one last thing. See that apple tree? I'd love to eat one more apple before I die. They're my favorite fruit. Could you climb up and get me one? Just one apple, and then I'll come with you willingly." The devil, suspicious after the last encounter, but thinking he'd learned his lesson, agreed. What harm could there be in an apple? He climbed the tree, reached for the ripest apple on the highest branch. And the moment the devil was in the tree, Jack pulled out a knife and carved crosses into the trunk. Deep crosses all around the base of the tree, holy symbols, Christian power. The devil tried to climb down and found he couldn't. The crosses repelled him. He was trapped in the tree, unable to pass the holy symbols Jack had carved. The devil roared. The tree shook, but the crosses held. Jack looked up at the furious devil and smiled. "Here's my offer," he said. "I'll chisel out these crosses and let you down. But in exchange, you have to promise never to take my soul. Not in 10 years. Not in 100 years. Not ever. Promise me that you'll never, ever claim my soul, and I'll set you free." The devil wanted to refuse. He wanted to tear Jack limb from limb, but he was trapped. And a promise given under these circumstances, a promise involving holy symbols and trickery, would be binding even on him. The spiritual laws that governed reality would enforce it. Through gritted teeth, the devil agreed. "Fine. I will never take your soul. Now, let me down." Jack chiseled out the crosses. The devil climbed down from the tree, his form radiating fury. He pointed a finger at Jack. "You think you've won," the devil said. "You think you're so clever. But you've made a terrible mistake. You'll see." And he vanished. Jack laughed. He'd done it. He'd outwitted the devil twice. He was free. His soul was safe from hell forever. But Jack didn't understand what he'd done. He thought he'd won, but he'd actually lost in the worst possible way. Years passed. Jack continued his dissolute life, drinking and cheating and lying. He'd beaten the devil, or so he thought. So why bother changing? Why become a good person when you've already guaranteed you won't go to hell? But life catches up with everyone eventually. Jack's body, abused by years of alcohol and hard living, finally gave out. One night, in a pub, in the middle of a drink, his heart simply stopped. He slumped over the bar and died. Just like that. Quietly, alone, unmourned. His soul rose from his body and found itself standing in darkness. Not the warm darkness of a pub or a bedroom, but an infinite darkness, an emptiness that stretched in all directions. Jack looked around, confused. Then he saw a light in the distance. A warm, golden light. Beautiful, inviting. He walked toward it. The light grew brighter. It became a gate, a massive, beautiful gate made of pearl and gold, radiating love and peace and safety. And standing before the gate was an old man with a kind face and a long white beard, holding a large book. Saint Peter, the keeper of heaven's gates. "Welcome," Saint Peter said gently. Then he opened his book and looked for Jack's name. His expression changed. His face grew sad. He closed the book. "I'm sorry," Saint Peter said, "but you can't enter here." Jack's heart, or whatever passed for a heart in his spiritual form, sank. "Why not?" he asked, though he already knew. "You lived a selfish life," Saint Peter said. "You hurt people. You never repented. You never showed love or compassion. You tricked others for your own gain. You never did a single truly good deed. Heaven is for those who have loved, who have shown mercy, who have tried, even if imperfectly, to do good. You didn't. You can't come in. Jack felt a cold terror. But where do I go? St. Peter looked at him with pity. There is only one other place. Jack's soul descended, down through the darkness, falling through layers of reality until he reached the gates of hell. They were not beautiful like heaven's gates. They were iron and stone, radiating heat and the screams of the damned. Jack could hear the suffering inside, could smell the sulfur and the burning. But he had nowhere else to go. He approached the gates and knocked. The gates swung open, and there stood the devil, exactly as Jack remembered him. But the devil was smiling. "Jack," the devil said, "I've been expecting you." "Let me in," Jack said. The devil's smile widened. "I can't." Jack stared. "What? What do you mean you can't?" "You tricked me," the devil said. "Twice. You made me promise I would never take your soul. And I keep my promises. I cannot claim you. I cannot take you into hell. You're not mine. You'll never be mine." "But I can't get into heaven," Jack said, panic rising in his voice. "St. Peter turned me away. If I can't go to heaven and I can't come to hell, where can I go?" The devil shrugged. "That's your problem, not mine. You were too wicked for heaven and too clever for hell. You're stuck in between. You'll wander forever, caught between this world and the next, belonging nowhere." But I can't just wander in the darkness. Give me something. At least give me a light so I can see." The devil considered. Then, almost as an afterthought, he reached into the fires of hell and pulled out a single burning coal. An ember, glowing red hot, burning with hellfire that would never go out. He tossed it to Jack. "There. One light. Eternal. That's all you get. Now go." And the gates of hell slammed shut. Jack stood in the darkness between worlds, holding the burning ember. It was hot, painfully hot, but it wouldn't consume his spiritual hands. It would burn forever, giving off light but never going out. He needed something to carry it in. Looking around in the darkness, he found a vegetable growing wild. A turnip, large and round. Turnips were common in Ireland, growing wild in fields and along roadsides. Jack carved out the turnip, hollowing it out, scooping out the flesh. He placed the burning ember inside. The turnip became a lantern, glowing from within, lit by hellfire. And Jack began to walk. He walked through the darkness between life and death, between heaven and hell, between one world and the next. He couldn't die because he was already dead. He couldn't live because he'd already died. He couldn't enter heaven because he was too wicked. He couldn't enter hell because he'd tricked the devil into promising never to take him. Jack was trapped, alone, forever. He wandered the earth, his lantern lighting his way, looking for a place to rest, a place to belong, and never finding it. He became known as Jack of the Lantern, which was eventually shortened to Jack O' Lantern. On dark nights, especially around Samhain, the time when the boundary between worlds was thin, people claimed to see strange lights in bogs and marshes and fields, glowing lights that appeared and disappeared, that seemed to move with intelligence, that led travelers astray. "That's Jack," they would say, still wandering, still looking, still carrying his lantern. The lights had natural explanations: marsh gas, foxfire, bioluminescent fungi, the way moonlight reflects off water. But to the Irish peasants, they were Jack O' Lantern. The man too clever for his own good. The man who had tricked the devil and been punished with eternal wandering. And people began to think, if Jack was out there, wandering, maybe we could use him. Maybe we could use his image to protect ourselves from other wandering spirits. So Irish families began carving turnips. Large turnips, hollowed out, with faces carved into them. Scary faces, grotesque faces, faces that looked like they were grimacing in eternal punishment. They would place candles or embers inside, creating a lantern, a crude imitation of Jack's own lantern. Then they would place these carved turnips in their windows, on their doorsteps, outside their homes. The logic was twofold. First, evil spirits wandering on Samhain might see the carved face and think, that's Jack-o'-lantern. He's dangerous, unpredictable. Better stay away from that house. Second, the carved faces themselves were apotropaic, protective symbols. They were wards, sigils, magical signs that said protected and guarded and stay away. The faces weren't supposed to be cute or friendly. They were supposed to be terrifying. They were supposed to look like Jack's face, twisted in eternal suffering, grimacing from his punishment, burning from the inside out. Every carved turnip was a representation of Jack's damnation, a reminder that cleverness without morality leads to being trapped forever, belonging nowhere, wandering in darkness. The tradition of carving jack-o'-lanterns remained strong in Ireland and Scotland for centuries. But in the 1840s, Ireland was struck by catastrophe. The potato famine and Gorta Mór, the Great Hunger, devastated Ireland. A potato blight destroyed the staple crop that most Irish people depended on for survival. Over the course of about 7 years, approximately 1 million Irish people died of starvation and disease. Another million emigrated, fleeing to America, Canada, Australia, anywhere they might survive. Those who came to America brought their traditions with them, including Halloween and jack-o'-lanterns. But America didn't have turnips. At least, not the large, hard turnips that grew wild in Ireland. What America did have was pumpkins. Indigenous to the Americas, pumpkins were abundant, grew to enormous sizes, and were much easier to carve than turnips. The flesh was softer, the wall was thicker, you could create more elaborate designs, so Irish immigrants adapted. They began carving pumpkins instead of turnips, creating much larger, more visible jack-o'-lanterns. The tradition caught on quickly. By the late 1800s, carved pumpkins had become the defining symbol of American Halloween. But most people who carved them didn't know the story anymore. They didn't know about Jack, about his bargain with the devil, about his eternal punishment. They just knew that you carved faces into pumpkins on Halloween. It was tradition. The meaning had been lost. The decoration remained. Jack's story is a moral tale, a warning disguised as folklore. It's about the danger of cleverness without wisdom, the danger of pride, the danger of thinking you can outsmart everyone, including the devil, without consequences. Jack won both his confrontations with the devil. He got what he wanted, freedom from damnation. But he didn't get what he needed, redemption. He had 10 years to change, to become a better person, to earn his way into heaven. He didn't. He wasted his second chance because he thought he didn't need to change. And so he ended up in a state worse than hell. At least in hell, you belong somewhere. You have a place, even if it's a terrible place. Jack has nothing. He's nowhere. He's trapped in the liminal space between worlds, forever wandering, forever alone. That's his punishment. Not torture, not fire, not physical pain. Just eternal, lonely wandering. Never arriving, never belonging, never resting. And every Halloween, when we carve pumpkins and put candles inside them, we're recreating Jack's punishment. We're making him over and over again. Millions of jack-o'-lanterns, each one a representation of a soul in eternal torment, glowing from within with stolen hellfire, grimacing in the darkness. We've turned damnation into decoration. We've made a folk devil into a fun family craft. We hollow out a vegetable, carve a face, often a smiling face now, not a grimacing one, and put it on our porch, and we think it's cute. But Jack's still out there, in the story, still wandering, still carrying his turnip lantern, still paying the price for being too clever and not clever enough, both at once. And every year, when October 31st comes around, when the boundary between worlds grows thin, when the darkness seems deeper and the night seems longer, maybe Jack stops his wandering for a moment and looks at all these houses, covered in carved pumpkins, glowing with artificial light, each one a mockery of his eternal suffering. Maybe he laughs, or maybe he weeps. We'll never know, because we've forgotten him. We've forgotten what the jack-o'-lantern really means. We've kept the symbol and lost the warning. So, every Halloween, we carve jack-o'-lanterns, placing them on our porches and in our windows, turning damnation into decoration without even realizing it. We've made Jack's suffering into a children's craft project, his eternal punishment into something cute and fun. But jack-o'-lanterns aren't the only Halloween tradition that has lost its original meaning and original terror. There's another tradition, one that seems innocent on the surface, but which has roots in something darker: the systematic murder of women and their cats. When Christianity absorbed Halloween, it brought its own terrors with it. The church taught that the devil was real, that he had servants on earth, that those servants, witches, were mostly women, and that they gathered on Halloween night to worship evil. The witch hunts that followed would kill tens of thousands of people. They would turn women into monsters and cats into demons. They would make Halloween a night not just of death, but of persecution. And the symbol that would come to represent all of this, the animal that would be forever linked with Halloween and witchcraft and evil, was the most innocent creature imaginable: the black cat. When we hear trick or treat today, we think of children in costumes carrying plastic pumpkin buckets, politely asking for candy. We think of neighbors smiling as they drop fun-sized candy bars into outstretched bags. We think of it as wholesome, innocent, adorable. But that phrase, trick or treat, is not a cheerful greeting. It's a threat. Give me a treat, or I'll play a trick on you. Give me what I want, or there will be consequences. It's an ultimatum delivered by someone in a mask, standing at your door in the darkness. We've forgotten that this was once real, that the tricks were real, that the threat was real, that trick or treat wasn't a cute rhyme, it was extortion. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to Scotland and Ireland in the 18th and 19th centuries, to a time when Halloween wasn't fun, when it was desperate, when it was dangerous. We've already discussed souling, the medieval practice where poor people would go door to door on All Souls' Day, offering to pray for the dead in exchange for soul cakes. This was begging, but sanctified begging, framed as religious charity. But souling had an edge to it that we didn't fully explore before. Yes, it was about praying for the dead, but it was also about survival. the people who went souling were genuinely hungry. They were the poorest members of society, peasants, beggars, children. For them, the food they collected wasn't extra. It was essential. It might be the difference between eating that week or not. And while souling was usually peaceful, there was always an implied threat underneath. If you gave generously, you were praised. Your household was blessed, and the soulers moved on. But if you refused, if you turned them away without giving anything, there could be consequences. Not immediate violence, but your reputation in the village would suffer. People would remember that you were stingy, that you refused to help the poor, that you didn't honor the dead properly. And in small communities, where reputation was everything, where you depended on your neighbors for survival, that could be devastating. So souling, while ostensibly voluntary, had an element of social coercion. You gave because it was the right thing to do, yes, but also because refusing had costs. Guising, the Scottish and Irish tradition of dressing in costume and performing for treats, added another layer. The performers weren't just begging passively. They were demanding attention, demanding to be let into your space, demanding you watch and listen and then reward them. And the performances could be unsettling. Young people in grotesque masks, reciting strange poems, singing eerie songs. Sometimes the performances were funny, but often they were deliberately spooky, meant to unnerve, meant to remind you that this was Samhain night, that the boundary between worlds was thin, that danger was everywhere. You gave treats partly to reward a good performance, but also to make them go away, to get these masked strangers off your doorstep, to end the uncomfortable interaction. Again, there was an implied threat. If you don't reward us, we won't leave. We'll keep performing, getting louder, more insistent. Or we'll leave, but we'll remember. And we might come back. But souling and guising were relatively tame. The real darkness came from another tradition, one that was less about religion or performance and more about naked intimidation. In Scotland and Ireland, the night before Halloween or Halloween night itself became known as Mischief Night or Devil's Night. It was a night when young men, mostly teenagers and young adults, would roam the streets in groups playing pranks. Except pranks is too gentle a word for what actually happened. If a household had been generous on Halloween, if they'd given food to soulers and guisers, if they'd participated properly in the traditions, they were usually left alone. But if a household had been stingy, if they'd refused to give, if they'd turned people away, they became targets. The young men would unhinge gates and carry them away, overturn outhouses with people sometimes still inside, block chimneys so houses filled with smoke, let livestock out of pens, steal tools, equipment, anything not locked away, throw rotten vegetables and animal waste at houses, break windows, damage property. These weren't harmless pranks. This was vandalism, intimidation, sometimes outright violence, and the authorities largely allowed it. It was tradition. It was Halloween. Boys will be boys. Unless someone was seriously injured or killed, the constables looked the other way. The message was clear: give treats on Halloween or suffer tricks afterward. It was a protection racket, enforced by community consensus and the threat of destruction. Why was this tolerated? Why didn't communities crack down on this behavior? Because underneath the violence was genuine desperation. Ireland and Scotland in the 18th and 19th centuries were among the poorest regions in Europe. tenant farming, absentee landlords, religious discrimination, limited economic opportunities. All of these created crushing poverty. Most people lived on the edge of starvation most of the time. For poor families, Halloween wasn't just a festival, it was a survival mechanism. It was one of the few nights of the year when they could go door to door and demand food and actually receive it, because tradition mandated generosity. The food collected on Halloween had to last. Winter was coming. There would be months when work was scarce, when food was expensive, when children went hungry. What you gathered on Halloween might keep your family alive. So yes, the young men playing tricks were committing vandalism, but they were also enforcing a social safety net. They were making sure that the wealthy shared with the poor, that food didn't stay locked up in rich households while poor families starved. It was brutal, it was unfair, it targeted innocent people, but it came from a place of desperation. And then, in the 1840s, desperation became catastrophe. The potato blight struck Ireland. The potatoes, the staple crop that fed most of the Irish population, rotted in the ground. Year after year, the harvest failed, and people began to starve. Not gradually, not slowly, massively, catastrophically. Approximately 1 million people died. Another million emigrated. Ireland's population dropped by 20 to 25% in 7 years. Entire villages were abandoned. Families were torn apart. The social fabric of Ireland disintegrated. Those who could flee did. Many went to America, cramming themselves into ships, crossing the Atlantic in terrible conditions, hoping for a better life in the New World. They brought almost nothing with them. No money, no possessions. But they brought their traditions. They brought Halloween. Irish immigrants arrived in America in waves throughout the 19th century, but especially during and after the famine. They settled primarily in cities: Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago. They took whatever work they could find. They were poor, discriminated against, struggling to survive. But they kept their traditions. They celebrated Halloween. They carved turnips and later pumpkins. They told ghost stories. They went door to door asking for food. American society initially didn't know what to make of Halloween. It wasn't an American tradition. It wasn't British. It was this strange Irish thing that involved costumes and begging and mischief. But slowly, it caught on. Other immigrant groups, Scottish, German, Italian, had similar autumn festivals. The traditions blended. Halloween became a melting pot festival, absorbing elements from multiple cultures. But the mischief came with it. And in American cities, with their crowded tenements and ethnic tensions and economic inequality, Halloween mischief became Halloween violence. By the late 19th century, Halloween in American cities had become genuinely dangerous. Groups of young men, often teenagers, would roam the streets on Halloween night, vandalizing property on a massive scale. They would overturn streetcars, destroy street lamps, block roads with debris, set fires, assault people, break into stores. The police couldn't control it. There were too many people participating, too many acts of vandalism happening simultaneously. The police would chase one group, and 3 more would commit crimes elsewhere. Newspapers ran stories condemning Halloween violence. Community leaders called for the holiday to be banned. Insurance companies raised rates for Halloween night. Businesses boarded up their windows. Halloween had become a genuine social problem, but banning it didn't work. Whenever cities tried to prohibit Halloween celebrations, the violence got worse. The young men saw it as a challenge. as the authorities trying to take away their traditional right to mischief. In the 1920s and 1930s, community leaders tried a different approach, not banning Halloween, but reforming it, redirecting it, making it safe and wholesome. This was part of a broader progressive movement in American society, the idea that you could solve social problems through education, organization, and structured activities, rather than through punishment. Communities began organizing Halloween parties. Schools held Halloween pageants. Parks departments created haunted houses and costume contests. Churches held harvest festivals. The goal was to give young people something to do on Halloween night, structured activities that would keep them busy and supervised, that would channel their energy into harmless fun rather than destructive mischief. And they explicitly encouraged homeowners to give treats to children who came to their doors. Give them candy, give them apples, give them something, and they won't vandalize your property. It was the same logic as the old Irish tradition: treats prevent tricks. But now it was being deliberately implemented as social policy. The phrase trick or treat first appeared in print in the 1930s in North America. It wasn't traditional. It was a newly coined phrase that explicitly stated what had always been implicit. Give me something, or I'll cause trouble. But now it was being said by children, not by young men. It was being said in a playful tone, not a threatening one. The violence was being drained out of the tradition deliberately. During World War II, 1939 to 1945, Halloween celebrations were curtailed. Sugar was rationed, so candy was scarce. There were more important things to worry about than Halloween. The tradition faded somewhat. But after the war ended, Halloween exploded. The baby boom created millions of children. Suburban expansion created safe neighborhoods where children could walk door to door without fear. Economic prosperity meant families could afford to buy candy for trick-or-treaters, and candy companies saw an opportunity. Before the 1950s, the treats given on Halloween varied: homemade cookies, apples, nuts, coins, small toys, whatever the household had available. But candy companies began marketing specifically for Halloween. They created fun-size candy bars, smaller versions of regular candy bars, packaged in bulk, perfect for handing out to trick-or-treaters. They ran advertising campaigns showing happy children receiving candy. They made candy the default Halloween treat, and it worked. By the 1960s, candy had become synonymous with trick-or-treating. By the 1970s, most households gave only candy. Today, Americans spend over $3 billion on Halloween candy annually. The candy companies had successfully commercialized a tradition that had begun as survival begging, had evolved into extortion, and had been reformed into a children's game. What happened to the trick part of trick or treat? It faded. Slowly but surely, the threat was removed. By the 1960s and 70s, most trick-or-treaters were young children accompanied by parents. They weren't capable of vandalism, even if they wanted to commit it. The phrase trick or treat became a greeting, a formula, something you said because that's what you were supposed to say. Occasionally, older children would still play pranks, throwing eggs, toilet papering houses, soaping windows. But these were minor annoyances, not the serious property destruction of earlier eras. And even these mild pranks were increasingly discouraged and punished. By the 1980s and 90s, the trick had been almost entirely eliminated. Trick-or-treating had become pure treat-giving. Children would come to your door, say trick or treat, and you would give them candy. No threat, no intimidation, just a polite transaction. We had successfully transformed a protection racket into a cute children's activity. We forgot that trick or treat was once a real choice. Give us food or we'll destroy your property. We forgot that Halloween was a night of genuine danger when masked groups roamed the streets committing violence. We forgot that trick-or-treating came from hunger, from poverty, from desperate people demanding that the wealthy share their resources or face consequences. We forgot that when children say trick or treat, they're echoing a threat that was once very real, very dangerous, and enforced through vandalism and intimidation. We've turned begging into a game. We've turned extortion into entertainment. We've sanitized the desperation and kept only the fun. And that's probably good. It's probably better that children can go door to door without anyone actually fearing vandalism. It's better that Halloween is safe and wholesome and commercial. But the structure remains. Strangers coming to your door, wearing masks so you can't identify them, demanding you give them something, implying, however vaguely, that refusing has consequences. The threat has been neutered, but the skeleton of the threat remains. And sometimes, the old darkness resurfaces. Every few years, a story emerges about tampered candy, razor blades in apples, poison in candy bars, needles in chocolate. Most of these stories are urban legends. They're not real. Investigations consistently find that nearly all alleged candy tampering cases are either hoaxes or are committed by family members, not by strangers giving out candy. But the stories persist because there's something about trick-or-treating that makes us uneasy. Something about opening our door to masked strangers. Something about the implied contract. You give them treats. Or what? In the modern sanitized version, there's no or. But our subconscious remembers. Our culture remembers. There's supposed to be an or. There's supposed to be a consequence for refusing. And so we imagine the worst. We imagine poisoned candy. We imagine predators using Halloween as cover. We imagine danger lurking behind every mask. The rational mind knows this is absurd. The statistics show that Halloween is not particularly dangerous, that trick-or-treating is generally safe, that stranger danger has been vastly overblown. But the lizard brain remembers when masked strangers at your door were genuinely threatening, remembers when refusing them brought real consequences, remembers when Halloween was the night you paid protection money to avoid violence. We've domesticated trick-or-treating, but we can't entirely eliminate the unease encoded in its structure. The structure of strangers, masks, demands, and implied threats. Today, trick-or-treating is a beloved American tradition. Parents take their young children door to door, helping them say trick or treat, making sure they say thank you, teaching them social skills through this ritualized interaction. It's sweet. It's wholesome. It builds community. Neighbors who barely speak to each other all year will open their doors on Halloween night, smile at children, give out candy. It's a shared cultural experience, a collective ritual that brings people together. But underneath that sweetness is a history of hunger, of poverty, of desperation, of violence. Underneath the cute costumes and the fun-sized candy bars is the ghost of an Ireland starving, of an America industrializing, of poor people demanding that the rich share or face destruction. We've paved over that history. We've built a cheerful Halloween subdivision on top of a graveyard of hunger and violence. But the bones are still down there, under the surface, in the structure of the tradition itself. When a child says trick or treat, they're speaking a formula they don't understand. They're making a threat they don't mean. They're performing a ritual whose purpose they've forgotten. They're ghosts, in a way. Ghosts of Irish children who genuinely needed that food to survive the winter. Ghosts of Scottish teenagers who would overturn your outhouse if you refuse them. Ghosts of desperate people for whom Halloween was not a game but a matter of survival. We dress our children as ghosts and send them door to door, and we don't realize they actually are ghosts. Not supernatural ghosts, but historical ghosts. Echoes of the past, performing rituals whose meanings have been lost. Trick or treat. Give me something or I'll hurt you. Except we've forgotten the second part. We've kept the begging and lost the threat. We've kept the formula and lost the desperation. And maybe that's for the best. Maybe it's good that children can beg for candy without anyone remembering that begging was once the only thing standing between survival and starvation. But sometimes, late on Halloween night, when the last of the trick-or-treaters have gone home, when the streets are dark and quiet, when you're turning off your porch light and throwing away the empty candy wrappers, sometimes it's worth remembering. Worth thinking about the children in Ireland who went door to door not for fun, but to survive. Worth honoring their desperation, their hunger, their need. They're the real ghosts of Halloween. And trick-or-treating is their memorial, even though we've forgotten what we're memorializing. We've taken a survival mechanism and turned it into a children's game. We've transformed extortion into entertainment. We've made begging cute and removed all traces of the desperation that created it. But Halloween's connection to real suffering, real persecution, real violence didn't end with Irish poverty. As Halloween evolved through medieval and early modern Europe, another form of violence became associated with it. A violence that targeted women specifically. A violence that turned the powerless into monsters and made independence itself a crime. The witch hunts were coming, and they would make Halloween a night of terror for anyone who was different, anyone who was alone, anyone who dared to live outside the narrow boundaries society had drawn. And at the center of the witch hunts, at the heart of the persecution, was a creature that had nothing to do with evil, that was guilty only of independence. The black cat. There was a time when cats were sacred. In ancient Egypt, cats were honored, protected by law, associated with the goddess Bastet. Killing a cat, even accidentally, could result in the death penalty. When a household cat died, the family would go into mourning, shaving their eyebrows as a sign of grief. Cats were mummified and buried with honor. In Celtic and Norse mythology, cats were associated with fertility goddesses, Freya in Norse tradition, Ceridwen in Celtic lore. They were seen as magical creatures, certainly, but not evil. They were mysterious, independent, liminal beings that moved between the human world and the wild. Cats were useful. They killed vermin. They protected grain stores from rats and mice. In agricultural societies, cats were valuable, respected, even loved. But then Christianity spread across Europe, and Christianity had complicated feelings about anything associated with pagan religions. The early church was wary of cats. They had been honored by pagans, which made them suspect. But the real turning point came later, in the medieval period, when the church began to formalize its teachings about the devil and his servants. In 1232, Pope Gregory IX issued a papal bull, an official church document, called Vox in Rama, Voice in Rama. This document was ostensibly about heretical sects in Germany, but it contained a passage that would have devastating consequences for cats. The bull claimed that heretics worshipped the devil in the form of a black cat. It described rituals where a black cat would appear, and the heretics would kiss it and pledge allegiance to Satan. Whether these rituals actually occurred is irrelevant. What matters is that the Pope had officially linked cats, especially black cats, with devil worship. And when the Pope says something, it becomes church doctrine. It becomes truth. The reasoning was simple enough from the church's perspective. Cats are independent. They don't obey humans like dogs do. They're nocturnal. They have glowing eyes. They move silently. They're mysterious. Independence, in medieval Christian theology, was suspicious. God had established a hierarchy. God over humans, humans over animals, men over women, masters over servants. Everything and everyone had their proper place. Cats didn't fit into this hierarchy. They served no master. They came and went as they pleased. They couldn't be controlled. Therefore, cats must be demonic. They must be in league with the devil, who himself was the ultimate rebel against divine authority. It was a bizarre logical leap, but it was made, and it was enforced, and the consequences were horrific. Starting in the 13th century and continuing for hundreds of years, cats across Europe were systematically killed. They were burned alive in bonfires, especially on religious feast days. They were thrown from towers and tall buildings. They were tortured in public ceremonies. They were hunted for sport. This wasn't random cruelty. This was sanctioned, encouraged, celebrated violence. It was seen as a holy act, a way of driving out evil, of demonstrating devotion to God by destroying the devil's creatures. In some towns, burning bags full of living cats was part of the official celebration of religious holidays. The screams of the cats were seen as the screams of demons being purified by holy fire. Black cats were especially targeted because they were most strongly associated with the devil. But all cats suffered. Simply being a cat was enough to make you a target. Fewer cats meant more rodents. Rats and mice, no longer kept in check by predators, multiplied. They infested grain stores, contaminating food. They spread throughout cities, living in the walls, thriving in the garbage-filled streets of medieval towns. And rats carried fleas, and fleas carried disease. In 1347, the Black Death arrived in Europe. Bubonic plague, spread by fleas on rats, killed between 30% and 60% of Europe's population over the next few years. Approximately 50 million people died. Did the cat massacre contribute to the plague's devastation? We can't know for certain. The plague would have spread regardless. It was too virulent, too easily transmitted. But fewer cats certainly didn't help. The very creatures that could have controlled the rat population had been systematically destroyed because the church declared them evil. The irony is almost unbearable. The church killed cats to fight evil, and in doing so, they may have helped unleash the worst natural disaster in European history. But did the church learn from this? Did they reverse course, encourage people to keep cats, recognize their mistake? Number. Instead, they found a new target for their fear and their violence. If the plague had been caused by evil and cats were evil, then someone must have been working with the cats. Someone must have been using them to spread disease, to cause destruction, to serve the devil. Witches. In 1487, a German Catholic clergyman named Heinrich Kramer published a book called Malleus Maleficarum, The Hammer of Witches. This book was a handbook for identifying, prosecuting and executing witches. It described what witches were, servants of Satan, what they did, cast spells, cause harm, worship the devil, how to recognize them, various signs and tests, and how to deal with them, torture until confession, then execution. The book was enormously influential. It went through multiple editions. It was used by both Catholic and Protestant witch hunters. It became the definitive guide to witchcraft for over 200 years, and it had a lot to say about cats. According to the Malleus Maleficarum, witches had familiars, demons in animal form that served them, helped them cast spells, acted as spies and messengers. These familiars could take many forms, but the most common was a cat, especially a black cat. The book claimed that witches could transform into cats, that they used cats to do their bidding, that cats were essentially demons in feline form. If you owned a cat, you might be a witch. If a cat lived near your house, you might be consorting with demons. If you talked to a cat, you might be giving it instructions for evil deeds. The logic was circular and unfalsifiable. Cats are evil. Witches work with evil. Therefore, witches work with cats. If you have a cat, you're probably a witch. Let's be clear about something. There were no actual witches. Not in the sense the witch hunters meant. There were no women making pacts with Satan, flying on broomsticks, casting curses, or causing harm through magic. What there were, women who were vulnerable, who didn't fit into society's narrow expectations, who could be scapegoated when things went wrong. The typical witch was a woman. About 75 to 80% of those accused and executed were women. Old, past menopause, no longer useful for childbearing. Poor, wealthy women were rarely accused. Alone, widowed, never married or estranged from family. Outspoken, disagreed with neighbors, didn't defer to men. A healer, knew about herbs, helped with childbirth. An owner of cats, for companionship, for pest control. In other words, women who were independent, who lived outside male authority, who had knowledge that seemed mysterious, and who had cats. These women weren't threats. They were the most vulnerable members of society, but they were convenient scapegoats when crops failed, when children died, when livestock got sick, when anything bad happened. People needed someone to blame, and the church had taught them who to blame. Witches, women who had made pacts with the devil. The witch hunts lasted from roughly 1450 to 1750, with peak intensity in the 16th and 17th centuries. During this period, an estimated 40,000 to 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft in Europe and European colonies. Some historians put the number higher. The trials were nightmares of injustice. Evidence of witchcraft included owning a cat, especially a black cat, talking to animals, living alone, being argumentative or unpleasant, having a birthmark or blemish, the devil's mark, floating when thrown into water, proved you were a witch. Sinking when thrown into water, proved you were innocent but you drowned. Confessing under torture, proved you were a witch. Refusing to confess under torture, proved you were a witch, because only the devil could give you strength to resist. It was impossible to prove innocence. The system was designed to convict. Women were tortured brutally to extract confessions. They were sleep-deprived, starved, subjected to thumbscrews and the rack, stripped naked, and searched for devil's marks. Eventually, Most confessed to whatever they were accused of, desperate to make the pain stop. And their cats were tortured too. Cats were assumed to be demons or familiar spirits. They were interrogated, tortured, killed, as if they could actually be made to confess their evil nature. Once convicted, witches were executed, most commonly by burning at the stake, though hanging was also used, and in some cases, drowning. Their property was confiscated, which, not coincidentally, enriched the church and local authorities. Witch hunting was profitable. Witches, according to the church and popular belief, gathered for Sabbaths, meetings where they would worship the devil, cast spells, engage in orgies, and perform various evil acts. These Sabbaths supposedly occurred on specific dates throughout the year, and the most powerful Sabbath, the most important gathering, was on Halloween night. Why Halloween? Because it was already understood as a night when the boundary between worlds was thin, when supernatural forces were strong. The church had absorbed Samhain, but couldn't eliminate its associations with spirits and darkness, so they reframed it. The spirits weren't the dead or fairies, they were demons, and the people who worked with demons were witches. On Halloween night, witches supposedly flew to remote locations, mountaintops, forests, crossroads, riding on broomsticks. Don't ask me why. Broomsticks. The symbolism is unclear, but possibly sexual. They would meet with Satan himself, who would appear as a large black goat or a dark man. They would kiss his anus. This is actually in the witch hunting literature. I'm not making it up. They would report on the evil they'd done. They would receive new instructions for causing harm. They would feast, drink, dance, and copulate. And their black cats would be there too, participating in the evil festivities. None of this happened. It was fantasy, projection. But people believed it. And on Halloween night, the fear of witches was at its highest. Women knew to stay inside on Halloween. To be visible, to be active, on that night was to risk accusation. If you were seen walking alone, carrying something, going anywhere, you might be accused of going to a Sabbath. Halloween became a night of terror for women, especially women who fit the witch profile. The witch hunts eventually ended. Enlightenment rationalism, changing legal standards, and exhaustion with the violence all contributed to their decline. By 1750, witch trials were rare. By 1800, they were essentially over. But the superstitions remained. Black cats were still considered unlucky, still associated with witches and evil. The folk belief persisted long after the trials ended. If a black cat crossed your path, it was a bad omen. You should turn around, go a different way, wait for someone else to cross first and break the curse. If you saw a black cat on Halloween night, it was especially bad. It might be a witch in disguise. It might be a demon. It should be avoided at all costs. These beliefs continued into the modern era. They're still with us today. Black cats are less likely to be adopted from animal shelters. They stay in shelters longer and are more likely to be euthanized. Some shelters won't adopt out black cats in October, fearing that people will abuse them for Halloween. There have been documented cases of black cats being tortured and killed around Halloween, though they're rarer than the urban legends suggest. But the threat is real enough that shelters take precautions. We're still punishing black cats for a crime they never committed. Being independent, being mysterious, being beloved by women who are murdered for the same qualities. And now, witches and black cats are Halloween decorations. We put images of witches in our windows, pointy hats, broomsticks, black cats by their side. We dress our children as witches, painting their faces green, giving them toy broomsticks. We've turned a genocidal tool of oppression into a cute costume. We've made mass murder into decoration. The women who were called witches were not evil. They were healers, midwives, herbalists, independent women. They helped their communities. They eased pain, delivered babies, provided what medical care existed in pre-modern Europe. And they were tortured and murdered for being women, for having knowledge, for owning cats, for not fitting into the narrow roles society demanded of them. Every witch decoration is a memorial to those women, whether we intend it or not. Every plastic witch on a broomstick represents a woman who was burned alive. Every cartoon black cat represents a real cat that was killed for being loved by the wrong person. We've forgotten what we're representing. We've turned horror into decoration, torture into fun, femicide into children's costumes. And maybe that's a form of victory. Maybe turning the imagery of oppression into something harmless is a way of robbing it of its power. Maybe making witch costumes popular is a way of saying, we're not afraid anymore. We've reclaimed this, but I think we've also lost something. We've lost the memory of what happened. We've lost the understanding that witch was an accusation that killed people. We've lost the knowledge that black cats were murdered by the thousands because of superstition and fear. We've kept the images and lost the meaning, kept the form and lost the content. And that means we can't honor the victims properly, can't remember their suffering properly, can't ensure it never happens again properly, because we've forgotten it happened at all. The witch hunts ended, but Halloween kept the imagery: witches, black cats, broomsticks, cauldrons. We've taken the tools of persecution and turned them into decoration. We've made femicide fun. But there's one more Halloween symbol we need to examine, one more tradition we need to unwrap, one that seems universal, timeless, purely symbolic: the skeleton. Why do we decorate with skeletons on Halloween? What do they represent? And why do they appear in so much Halloween imagery, grinning and dancing and celebrating? To answer that, we need to go back to the 14th century, back to Europe, back to the moment when death stopped being an abstract concept and became an omnipresent reality, back to the Black Death and to the art it inspired. The Dance of the Dead is about to begin. Before we talk about skeletons, we need to answer a question we've danced around but never directly addressed. Why October 31st? We know the Celts celebrated Samhain on this date. We know Christianity adopted it for All Hallows Eve. But why did the Celts choose October 31st in the first place? What made this specific date significant? The answer is both astronomical and agricultural, both practical and spiritual. October 31st falls roughly halfway between the autumn equinox around September 21st and the winter solstice around December 21st. In the Celtic calendar, this made it a cross-quarter day, a date that marked a significant transition in the solar year. But more importantly, late October was when the agricultural year ended and the dark season began. By October 31st, all crops had been harvested, all grain had been stored, all livestock that wouldn't survive. Winter had been slaughtered. All preparations for winter had been completed. There was nothing left to do but endure. The days were getting shorter. The sun was losing its power. The temperature was dropping, and everyone knew what was coming. Winter, the season when people died. In the ancient and medieval world, winter was not inconvenient or uncomfortable. It was deadly. Food supplies ran low. Stored grain could rot or be contaminated. Preserved meat could spoil. Starvation was a real threat. Disease spread more easily when people were crowded together in poorly ventilated homes, when immune systems were weakened by malnutrition and cold. The cold itself killed. Hypothermia, frostbite, frozen extremities leading to infection and gangrene. Every winter, some people in the village wouldn't survive to spring. The very old, the very young, the sick, the weak, they were most at risk. But no one was safe. A healthy adult could sicken and die within days. October 31st marked the boundary. Beyond this date, you entered the season of death. The light was dying, and people would die with it. We need to understand something fundamental about pre-modern life. Death was not rare or unexpected. It was constant and omnipresent. Most children didn't survive to adulthood. Infant mortality was staggeringly high. Childhood diseases, accidents, malnutrition, all of these killed regularly. Most women died before age 40, worn out by repeated pregnancies and childbirth complications. Most men died before age 50, worn out by physical labor and injury. Plague, famine, war. These killed on a massive scale, destroying entire communities. Everyone was intimately familiar with death. You had watched family members die. You had helped prepare bodies for burial. You had attended dozens of funerals by the time you were an adult. Death was not a distant abstraction. It was your neighbor, your sister, your child. It was the person you were eating breakfast with this morning, who would be cold and stiff by evening. And this is the context in which Halloween and all its death imagery developed. Halloween wasn't about pretending death was real. It was about acknowledging the death that everyone knew was real, was coming, was unavoidable. October 31st was when you faced the reality of death. When you prepared yourself spiritually and emotionally for the fact that some of the people gathered around the fire tonight wouldn't be here next year. The skeletons, the skulls, the images of death that would become associated with Halloween, these weren't decorations. They were reminders, warnings. Memento mori, remember, you will die. For centuries, Europeans lived with death as a constant but manageable presence. Yes, people died regularly, but life continued. Communities survived. Humanity endured. And then, in 1347, everything changed. The Black Death, bubonic plague, arrived in Europe via trading ships from Asia. It spread with horrifying speed. Within months, it had devastated entire cities. Within years, it had swept across the continent. The death toll was almost incomprehensible. Current estimates suggest that between 75 million and 200 million people died worldwide, with 30 to 60% of Europe's population perishing. Entire villages were wiped out. Cities lost half their populations. Families were destroyed. The social fabric disintegrated. And no one understood why. Medical knowledge of the time couldn't explain it. Religion offered explanations. God's punishment for sin, astrological events, bad air, but no solutions. Nothing stopped it. Nothing slowed it. You could be healthy in the morning and dead by evening. You could watch your children develop black swellings, buboes, and know they would die within days, screaming in agony, and you could do nothing. Death stopped being a predictable part of life and became a random, terrifying force that could strike anyone, anytime, for no discernible reason. The psychological impact was devastating. How do you make sense of a world where half the people you know die within a year? How do you process that level of trauma? Out of this trauma emerged a new art movement, the danse macabre, or dance of death. Beginning in the late 14th century and continuing through the 15th and 16th centuries, artists across Europe began creating images of skeletons dancing with the living. The images followed a formula. Death, personified as a skeleton, approaches different people: a king, a bishop, a merchant, a peasant, a young woman, a child. Death invites them to dance. They can't refuse. Death leads them away in a dance to the grave. The meaning was clear. Death comes for everyone. Rich or poor, powerful or weak, old or young. Death doesn't discriminate. Everyone will dance with death eventually. The images were not meant to be frightening in the modern sense. They were meant to be sobering, humbling. They were reminders that all earthly power, wealth, and status were temporary. Death was the great equalizer. These images appeared everywhere, in books, on church walls, in public squares. The danse macabre was printed as illustrated manuscripts, performed as plays, referenced in poetry and literature. Why skeletons specifically? Why not corpses or ghosts? Because the skeleton is what remains. It's the permanent structure underneath the temporary flesh. It's what you become when everything else has rotted away. And crucially, the skeleton is universal. A king's skeleton and a peasant's skeleton are indistinguishable. Strip away the flesh, the clothes, the signs of status, and we're all the same, just bones. The skeleton was democratic. It said, you think you're special, you're not. You're bones wearing meat, and soon the meat will be gone, and you'll just be bones. But why were the skeletons dancing? Why not walking, or standing still, or lying in graves? The dance was important. Death was depicted as lively, energetic, even cheerful. Not because death was fun, but because death was active. Death was always moving, always working, always claiming new victims. Death was also patient. Death could wait. Death knew it would win eventually. So why not dance while waiting? Why not be merry about the inevitable? There was dark humor in the danse macabre. The images often showed reluctant living people being dragged into the dance by gleeful skeletons. Kings try to hold on to their crowns. Merchants clutch their gold. Beautiful women pull away, trying to preserve their beauty. But death doesn't care. Death pulls them along anyway, and eventually they're dancing too, whether they want to or not. The message: you can resist, but death will get you anyway. You can deny it, fear it, fight it, but eventually you will dance. The danse macabre predates Halloween as we know it, but the imagery merged over time. Halloween was already the festival of death, the night when the dead could return, when mortality was acknowledged, when the boundary between life and death was thinnest. The skeleton, as the ultimate symbol of death, was a natural fit for Halloween imagery. But Halloween added another tradition to the mix: Dia de los Muertos, the Mexican Day of the Dead. Dia de los Muertos is celebrated on November 1st and 2nd in Mexico and other parts of Latin America. It coincides with All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, but it has roots in indigenous Aztec traditions that predate Christianity. The holiday is about honoring the dead, but the tone is very different from European traditions. Dia de los Muertos is joyful, celebratory. It's about welcoming the dead back for a visit, not fearing them. Families create ofrendas, altars, with photos of deceased loved ones, their favorite foods, marigold flowers, candles, and sugar skulls. They visit cemeteries, cleaning graves and decorating them. And crucially, they create calaveras, decorated skulls and skeletons. These are not meant to be scary. They're meant to be beautiful, joyful, celebrating life even in death. The skeletons in Dia de los Muertos art are often shown doing everyday activities, dancing, playing music, eating, drinking, celebrating. Death is not the end of participation in life. The dead are still part of the community. When Mexican traditions mixed with American Halloween traditions, which happened gradually throughout the 20th century, especially in the American Southwest, the imagery merged. American Halloween already had death imagery from European traditions. The danse macabre, memento mori art, ghost stories. Now it added the colorful, celebratory skeleton imagery from Dia de los Muertos. The result? Halloween skeletons that are both spooky and fun. Skeletons that dance, that grin, that are depicted in humorous poses. Skeleton decorations show skeletons driving cars, sitting at dinner tables, hanging from trees, playing instruments. We've made death into decoration. We've made mortality into a joke. We've taken the ultimate symbol of human vulnerability and turned it into plastic toys. And in doing so, we've lost the meaning. The original Danse Macabre was not about fun. It was about acknowledging mortality, about humility, about understanding that all earthly things are temporary. Memento mori means, remember you will die. It was meant to be a spiritual practice, a way of focusing on what truly matters. If you remember that you'll die, you waste less time on trivial things. You focus on your soul, on your relationships, on doing good while you can. Medieval people understood this. They lived with death constantly. They needed reminders to make peace with it, to prepare for it, to live well in the face of it. We don't live with death anymore, not the way they did. Death happens in hospitals, away from us. Bodies are handled by professionals. We rarely see corpses. We're insulated from death in a way our ancestors couldn't imagine. So when we put plastic skeletons in our yards, we're not engaging with mortality. We're engaging with the aesthetic of mortality, with the cartoon version of death. We're several layers removed from the original meaning. We see a skeleton and think Halloween decoration, not reminder of my inevitable death. And in a way, that's sad, because the reminder was useful. The memento mori served a purpose. It kept people grounded, humble, focused on what mattered. We've lost that. We've made death silly. We've domesticated mortality. And yet, despite our distance from death, despite our sanitization of mortality, we're more anxious about death than ever. Medieval people lived with death constantly. They accepted it, prepared for it, made spiritual peace with it. Death was terrible, yes, but it was also natural, expected, understood. We don't see death. We don't touch it. We've pushed it away, medicalized it, professionalized it. And because we don't see it, we fear it more. We're terrified of death. We spend billions trying to delay it, trying to avoid thinking about it. We medicalize aging. We pursue youth obsessively. We can't talk about death honestly. And then, once a year, we put plastic skeletons in our yards and pretend we're comfortable with mortality. But we're not. The skeletons are decorations, not reminders. They're aesthetics, not memento mori. We're playing with the imagery of death while being more distant from death than any humans in history. The medieval peasant putting a danse macabre image on their church wall was confronting their mortality. They were saying, yes, I will die. I acknowledge this. I prepare for this. The suburban American putting an inflatable skeleton on their lawn is doing something very different. They're participating in a commercial holiday, following a decorating trend, creating photo opportunities. They're not confronting mortality, they're avoiding it while wearing its costume. This is what we've lost. Halloween began as Samhain, a festival acknowledging that winter, the season of death, was coming, that some people would die before spring, that mortality was real and unavoidable. The bonfires, the offerings, the costumes, these were all ways of confronting death, of preparing for it, of trying to protect yourself while acknowledging you might not survive. The skeletons that would later become Halloween imagery were memento mori, reminders to live well because death was coming. The witch hunts, the cat massacres, these were about fearing death so much that you needed someone to blame, needed to believe you could control death by controlling evil. All of Halloween, in its historical forms, was about looking death in the face, not looking away, not pretending it wasn't real. But modern Halloween is the opposite. It's about making death into a game, into decoration, into something we can control and domesticate and make cute. We dress our children as skeletons, and they don't understand they're wearing symbols of their own mortality. They don't think, I am bones underneath. They think, this is a fun costume. We put plastic skeletons in silly poses, and we don't think all of us will be reduced to this. We think, this looks festive. We've kept Halloween's imagery and lost Halloween's purpose, kept the form and lost the meaning. So we decorate with skeletons, images of death made cute and commercial. We've taken the dance macabre and turned it into lawn ornaments. We've domesticated mortality itself. But why? Why do we still celebrate Halloween at all if we've forgotten what it means? Why do we keep these traditions, costumes, jack-o'-lanterns, trick-or-treating, witches, skeletons, when we've lost the context that created them? Is Halloween just empty commercialism? Just candy and costumes with no real substance? Or is there something deeper still happening? Something we do without understanding why we do it? Some need that Halloween fulfills, even though we've forgotten what that need is. To answer that, we need to step back and ask the fundamental question: what is Halloween for? Why do we still need it? And the answer might surprise you. Let's review what we've done to Halloween. We took Samhain, a Celtic festival where people lit bonfires to protect themselves from malevolent spirits and possibly performed human sacrifice, and we turned it into costume parties. We took All Hallows Eve, a Christian vigil before honoring saints and praying for souls in purgatory, and we turned it into a secular commercial holiday. We took Jack-o'-lantern, an Irishman's eternal damnation for tricking the devil, and we turned him into carved pumpkins with goofy faces. We took trick-or-treating, a survival mechanism where starving people demanded food under threat of violence, and we turned it into children politely collecting candy. We took the witch hunts, a systematic genocide of women and their cats, and we turned them into pointy hats and cartoon black cats. We took the Danse Macabre, medieval Europe's attempt to process the trauma of the Black Death, and we turned it into plastic skeletons in funny poses. Every tradition has been sanitized. Every symbol has been defanged. Every dark origin has been forgotten. Halloween is now candy and costumes and inflatable decorations. It's one of the most commercial holidays in America, generating billions in retail sales. It's been fully absorbed into consumer capitalism, turned into a profit center for candy companies and costume manufacturers. If the Celts who lit bonfires on Samhain could see modern Halloween, they wouldn't recognize it. If the Irish families carving turnips to ward off evil could see our decorated pumpkins, they would be baffled. If the women murdered as witches could see children wearing witch costumes, they would weep. We've lost the meaning. We've lost the fear. We've lost the context. And yet, we still celebrate Halloween. Millions of people participate enthusiastically. Children count down the days. Adults throw elaborate parties. Entire neighborhoods transform themselves with decorations. Why? If we've lost the meaning, why do we keep the form? Because even though we've forgotten the original purposes, Halloween still serves psychological and social functions. It still fills needs, even if we don't consciously understand what those needs are. First, Halloween lets us play with fear. Haunted houses, horror movies, scary costumes, jump scares, creepy decorations, all of these allow us to experience fear in a controlled environment. We can feel the adrenaline, the elevated heart rate, the primal terror response, and then we can turn on the lights, remove the mask, leave the haunted house, and return to safety. This is psychologically healthy. Humans need to practice their fear responses. We need to experience danger and learn to cope with it. Halloween provides a safe way to do this. The monsters aren't real, the danger isn't real, but the emotional practice is real. Children especially benefit from this. Halloween teaches them that scary things can be faced, that fear can be overcome, that monsters can be defeated. It's training for dealing with real fear later in life. Second, Halloween teaches social rituals. Trick-or-treating specifically teaches children how to approach strangers in a structured, appropriate way. Ask for things politely. Say thank you. Follow rules. Only certain houses, only at certain times. Respect boundaries. Interact with their community. Experience generosity from people they don't know. These are valuable lessons. Halloween is one of the few remaining occasions when children interact directly with their neighbors, when community bonds are actively reinforced, when strangers are expected to be kind to children. The ritual of trick-or-treating creates a shared experience across generations. Adults remember doing it as children. Now they participate by giving out candy. Eventually, they take their own children. It's a cycle that maintains community cohesion. Third, Halloween marks seasonal transition. We still need to mark time's passage. We still need rituals that acknowledge the changing seasons, even though we're no longer dependent on agriculture, even though we have heating and indoor lighting and year-round food availability. Psychologically, we need to prepare for the darker months. Halloween does this. It occurs at the moment when days are noticeably shorter. Darkness comes earlier. Weather changes. The outdoor season ends. We begin spending more time inside. Halloween is the last outdoor holiday before the indoor holidays of Thanksgiving and Christmas. It's the transition point. And having a ritual to mark that transition helps us adjust psychologically. Fourth, Halloween allows identity play. Costumes allow temporary identity transformation. For one night, you can be someone or something else. Children explore different roles and identities through costume choice. Adults can be absurd, sexy, scary, creative, all things they can't be in daily life. This is more than just fun. It's a psychological pressure valve. It allows people to express parts of themselves that are normally constrained by social expectations. The shy person can be bold. The serious person can be silly. The rule follower can be transgressive. And because everyone is in costume, because everyone has temporarily set aside their normal identity, there's a sense of freedom, of possibility, of liberation. Fifth, Halloween maintains community bonds. In modern suburban and urban America, many people barely know their neighbors. We live isolated lives, interacting mainly with people we choose to interact with. Family, co-workers, selected friends. Halloween is one of the few occasions when an entire neighborhood participates in something together. When you see people you normally just wave to. When children run from house to house, connecting the community through their movement. The effort of decorating, of buying candy, of answering the door. This is an investment in community. It says, I'm part of this neighborhood. I participate in shared rituals. I care about maintaining connections, and children especially benefit from experiencing their neighborhood as a safe, generous place, where adults they don't know will smile at them, give them treats, participate in the magic. But beyond these conscious functions, I believe Halloween serves a deeper, largely unconscious purpose. Halloween is our annual acknowledgement of darkness. Not literal darkness, though the holiday occurs as nights grow longer, but psychological, spiritual, existential darkness. The things we don't want to think about. Death, fear, evil, violence, the unknown. Modern life encourages us to ignore these things, to stay positive, to focus on productivity and success and happiness, to push away anything uncomfortable or painful. But humans can't function healthily by denying darkness. We need to acknowledge it, to face it, to integrate it into our understanding of the world. Halloween gives us permission to do this. For one night, we can acknowledge that death is real, fear is real, darkness exists. Not everything is safe or comfortable or controlled. We do it through decoration, through costume, through play. We've made it safe and commercial and fun. But underneath, we're still doing what the Celts did on Samhain. We're acknowledging the darkness that surrounds our small circles of light. The jack-o'-lanterns glowing in the darkness are still fires against the night, even if they're electric now. The costumes that disguise us are still camouflage, even if the threats aren't real. The treats we give out are still offerings, even if we don't believe in spirits anymore. The forms have changed. The consciousness has changed. But the fundamental human need that created Halloween hasn't changed. The need to acknowledge that darkness exists, that danger is real, that death comes for everyone. And then, having acknowledged it, to return to the light, to go back inside, turn on the lamps, eat the candy, remove the costume, and feel safe again. Halloween is a psychological round trip, into darkness and back to light, into fear and back to safety, into death awareness and back to life. We need that journey. We need to remember that the light is not eternal, that safety is not guaranteed, that we are vulnerable. Because only by acknowledging vulnerability can we truly appreciate what we have. So have we lost something by sanitizing Halloween? Yes. We've lost the immediate, visceral understanding that winter kills people, that hunger is real, that death is omnipresent, that women were murdered for being independent, that humans are capable of terrible cruelty, justified by fear. We've lost the historical consciousness that would allow us to look at a jack-o'-lantern and understand we're looking at eternal punishment, to look at a witch costume and remember the women who burned, to look at a skeleton and remember that death is our future, not just a decoration. We've traded depth for accessibility, meaning for fun, historical consciousness for commercial success. But we've also gained something. We've gained a holiday that's genuinely enjoyable for children, that builds positive memories, that's not traumatic or terrifying, but is still exciting and special. We've gained a holiday that brings communities together rather than dividing them, that creates shared experiences across class and religious lines. We've gained a holiday that lets us acknowledge darkness in a safe, controlled way, that lets us practice fear without real danger, that lets us think about death without being consumed by it. The trade-off might be worth it. The Celts needed Samhain to survive. The Irish needed trick-or-treating to survive. Medieval Europeans needed memento mori to cope with omnipresent death. We don't have those needs. We're lucky. We're safer, more comfortable, more protected from danger than any humans in history. So maybe it's okay that we've turned survival rituals into children's games. Maybe it's okay that we've domesticated fear and made death into decoration. As long as we remember, as long as we don't entirely forget what Halloween really is, what it came from, what it represents. As long as we occasionally stop and think, these traditions have meaning. This imagery has power. This holiday has roots in real suffering, real fear, real death. Here's the truth about Halloween. It's not one thing. It's never been one thing. It's a palimpsest, a manuscript where text has been written over and over, each new layer partially obscuring, but never entirely erasing what came before. The Celtic layer is still there. The bonfires, the costumes, the acknowledgement of death. The Roman layer is still there. The harvest themes, the apple games. The Christian layer is still there. The timing on All Hallows Eve, the acknowledgement of souls. The Irish famine layer is still there. The begging, the tricks, the desperation. The witch hunt layer is still there. The persecution, the black cats, the fear of women's power. The plague layer is still there. The skeletons, the dance macabre, the memento mori. The American commercial layer is there. The candy, the mass-produced costumes, the retail frenzy. All of it, simultaneously. None of it fully erased. Each generation adding their layer while the old layers remain, visible to anyone who knows how to look. When you carve a jack-o'-lantern, you're honoring Jack's damnation, Irish folklore, warding off evil spirits, Celtic tradition, participating in American harvest tradition, 20th century, creating Instagram content, 21st century, all at once, all of it true. When children say trick or treat, they're making an actual medieval threat, give me food or I'll vandalize your property, performing an Irish survival ritual, begging to survive winter, participating in American childhood tradition, collecting candy, learning social skills, polite, interaction with neighbors. The meaning has layers. The history has layers. Halloween has layers. And maybe that's its power. Maybe that's why it endures. Because it's big enough to contain multiple meanings, flexible enough to adapt to each era's needs, deep enough that you can strip away one layer and find another beneath it. So here's what happens on a modern Halloween. A family decorates their house. They put up plastic skeletons without thinking about the Black Death. They carve pumpkins without thinking about Jack's eternal wandering. They hang fake spider webs without thinking about persecution. They do it because it's fun, because their neighbors do it, because their children love it, because it's tradition. A child puts on a costume, maybe a superhero, maybe a princess, maybe a monster. They don't think about how costumes originated as disguises from malevolent spirits. They just know they get to pretend to be someone else for a night. The family goes trick-or-treating. The child knocks on doors, says the magic words, trick or treat, and receives candy from strangers. They don't think about Irish famine or extortion or survival mechanisms. They're just collecting candy and having fun. They come home. They sort the candy. They eat too much of it. They go to bed exhausted and happy, already planning next year's costume. And it's innocent. It's wholesome. It's exactly what a children's holiday should be. But underneath, if you know how to look, all the old darkness is still there. The Celtic dead are still crossing over. Jack is still wandering with his lantern. The Irish are still begging for food. The women murdered as witches are still screaming. The plague victims are still dancing. The darkness is still waiting at the edges of our light. We've built a cheerful Halloween subdivision on top of a graveyard, but the bodies are still beneath us. The bones are still there. We need Halloween because we need to remember that the darkness exists, not to dwell in it, not to be consumed by it, but to acknowledge it, to face it, to make peace with it. We need to remember that death is real, even if we're insulated from it. Danger is real, even if we're protected from it. Suffering is real, even if we're lucky enough to avoid it. Darkness is real, even if we live in the light. We need to practice fear in a safe environment. We need to think about mortality without being paralyzed by it. We need to confront the unknown while knowing we can return to safety. We need community rituals that bring us together across boundaries. We need traditions that connect us to our ancestors, even if we don't understand those connections. We need moments when we set aside our individual isolation and participate in something larger. We need to mark time's passage, to acknowledge seasonal transitions, to prepare ourselves psychologically for the darker months. And maybe, just maybe, we need to honor the dead. Not literally. We don't believe in spirits crossing over, most of us. But metaphorically, symbolically, we need to honor the Celts who survived winter through ritual and community, the Irish who survived famine through begging and emigration, the women who were murdered as witches, the plague victims who died screaming, all the humans throughout history who faced darkness we can barely imagine. Halloween is their memorial, even though we've forgotten what we're memorializing. So this Halloween, when you're decorating your house or taking your children trick-or-treating, or attending a party or watching horror movies, I invite you to remember. Remember the bonfires on Celtic hills, lit against the darkness that killed. Remember the Irish families carving turnips, trying to ward off evil and hunger both. Remember Jack, still wandering, still burning, still paying for cleverness without wisdom. Remember the women who were called witches, who were tortured and murdered for being different. Remember the black cats who were killed for being loved. Remember the plague victims dancing in the danse macabre, trying to make peace with mass death. Remember that every Halloween tradition has roots in real suffering, real fear, real death, and then celebrate. Enjoy the candy, laugh at the silly costumes, appreciate the decorations, have fun, because that's what we do. We take the darkness and we make it manageable. We take fear and we turn it into fun. We take death itself and we make it into decoration. That's not disrespectful. That's survival. That's resilience. That's the human spirit refusing to be crushed by darkness. Our ancestors faced real terrors. They created rituals to survive those terrors. We've inherited the rituals, but not the terrors. We're lucky, but we can still honor what they endured. We can still remember, even as we celebrate. We can still acknowledge the darkness, even as we live in the light. Halloween is a scar from when humanity was more vulnerable, when death was closer, when darkness was thicker. The wound has healed, but the scar remains. And every October 31st, we trace that scar with our fingers, decorating, costuming, trick-or-treating, playing with fear, acknowledging death, dancing with darkness, remembering without fully knowing what we're remembering, honoring the past without fully understanding what we're honoring, keeping the light burning against the darkness, even though we've forgotten why the darkness was so frightening. The veil is thin tonight, not because spirits cross over, but because time crosses over. The past bleeds into the present. History refuses to stay buried. The Celts light their bonfires in our jack-o'-lanterns. The Irish beg for food in our trick-or-treaters. The murdered women scream in our witch decorations. The plague dead dance in our plastic skeletons. The darkness presses against our windows, testing our light. And we light our electric candles, and we wear our store-bought costumes, and we eat our mass-produced candy, and we pretend we're not afraid. But we are afraid. We've always been afraid. That's human. The difference is, our ancestors knew what they feared. They named their fears. They created rituals to face those fears. We've forgotten the names. We've lost the meanings. We've turned survival into entertainment. But the fear remains. The darkness remains. The need to acknowledge death and danger and vulnerability, that remains. So light your jack-o'-lanterns, not to ward off spirits, but to remember those who needed warding, not to scare away evil, but to honor those who faced evil. Give treats to trick-or-treaters, not to avoid vandalism, but to remember those who begged to survive, not to buy off pranksters, but to honor the hungry. Wear your costumes, not to hide from spirits, but to remember those who needed hiding, not to play pretend, but to honor those for whom disguise was survival. Acknowledge the darkness. For one night, remember that it exists, that it's real, that it's always there, pressing against our circles of light. And then, when October 31st ends, when the sun rises on November 1st, when you throw away the candy wrappers and put away the decorations, when you return to normal life, carry a small piece of that darkness with you, not to be morbid, not to be depressed, but to be grateful. Grateful that you live in a time when Halloween is fun, not frightening, when costumes are choices, not necessities, when trick-or-treating is a game, not survival. Grateful for the light because you've acknowledged the darkness. Grateful for safety because you've remembered the danger. Grateful for life because you've thought about death. That's what Halloween teaches us, if we listen, if we remember, if we look beneath the commercial surface and see the bones underneath. Happy Halloween. May your ancestors rest peacefully. May your fires burn bright. May your candy be plentiful and your tricks be gentle. And may the darkness, when you acknowledge it, teach you to appreciate the light. Thank you for journeying with us through Halloween's hidden history. Thank you for keeping the candle lit. Thank you for remembering what we've forgotten. Until next time.